The sound of hoofbeats on the hard, packed earth jolted Nora Mackenzie from her troubled sleep, the stagecoach lurching violently as the driver pushed the team to their limits. Her wrists burned against the rope binding them, a cruel reminder that she was cargo, not a passenger. The year was 1876, and Nora Mackenzie was being delivered to a stranger who had purchased her as a bride. "Almost there, Missy," called the coach driver, his voice carrying no sympathy. "Julesburg just over the next ridge." Nora pressed her forehead against the dusty glass window, watching as the Colorado landscape rolled by in shades of amber and brown. At 22, she had never imagined her life would come to this, sold by her stepfather to settle a gambling debt, shipped westward with nothing but the clothes on her back and a marriage certificate bearing a stranger's name. The coach began to slow as they approached the town of Julesburg. Despite her dire circumstances, Nora couldn't help but notice the bustle of the frontier settlement, wooden buildings lining the main street, horses hitched to posts, men in dusty clothes moving with purpose, and women in practical frontier dresses going about their business. In another life, she might have found the scene interesting, even exciting. "End of the line," the driver announced as the coach rolled to a stop. He climbed down, his boots crunching on the gravel, and opened the door. "Out you go, Miss Mackenzie, or should I say the future Mrs. Wayland." Nora's legs trembled as she stepped down from the coach. The driver cut the ropes from her wrists, but the freedom was an illusion. She had nowhere to go, no money, no connections. She was 1,000 miles from Boston, from everything familiar, delivered like a parcel to a man she'd never met. "Where is he?" she asked, rubbing her chafed wrists. "The station," the driver replied, nodding toward a wooden building with a sign that read Julesburg Station. "Your husband-to-be is waiting inside." Nora squared her shoulders, drawing on the last reserves of her dignity. She would not be dragged inside like a reluctant animal. Whatever awaited her, she would face it on her feet, head high. Inside the station, the air was thick with tobacco smoke and the smell of unwashed bodies. A few travelers sat on benches, waiting for outbound coaches. Near the ticket counter stood a tall man dressed in practical ranch clothes, a cotton shirt, worn denim pants, and a wide-brimmed hat held in his hands. His face was weathered by sun and wind, but he wasn't the grizzled old man she had feared. He couldn't be more than 30, with clear blue eyes that watched her approach with an unreadable expression. "Mr. Wayland," the driver called out. "Delivery for you." The man's jaw tightened at the callous introduction. He stepped forward, eyes never leaving Nora's face. "Jacob Wayland," he said, his voice deeper than she expected and tinged with something that might have been embarrassment. "You must be Miss Mackenzie." "I am," Nora replied, fighting to keep her voice steady, "though I had little say in the matter of coming here." Something flickered in Jacob Wayland's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or recognition. He looked from Nora to the driver, then back again. "You're bound by contract, miss," the driver reminded her harshly. "Your stepfather signed the papers clear as day." "Mr. Wayland here paid good money for a bride, and a bride he's getting." Jacob's brow furrowed. He reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a folded paper, the marriage contract, Nora presumed. But instead of presenting it to her, he tore it in half, then quarters. "No one's bound by anything," he said quietly, surprising both Nora and the driver. "Miss Mackenzie, I apologize for the circumstances that brought you here, but I won't hold you to a contract you didn't willingly sign." He turned to the driver. "You can tell Mr. Bartholomew that his services won't be needed further." The driver's mouth fell open. "Now wait just a minute. I was paid to deliver, you delivered," Jacob cut him off. "Your job is done." He turned back to Nora. "Miss Mackenzie, the choice is yours." You can take the next coach back east if that's your wish. I'll pay your fare." Nora stared at him, certain she had misheard. "The choice is mine." "It is," Jacob confirmed. "I wanted a wife, yes, but not one brought here against her will." His eyes held hers steadily. "I have a ranch about 10 miles outside of town. It's not much, but it's growing. If you choose to stay, we can court properly. If not, I'll see you safely on your way home." Home. The word tasted bitter in Nora's mouth. "I have no home to return to, Mr. Wayland. My stepfather made that clear when he sold me to the highest bidder." Jacob's expression darkened. "Then stay here in Julesburg. I can arrange lodging for you in town until you decide what you want. You can find work, make your own way." The driver snorted. "Good luck with that. Pretty girl like her, alone in a frontier town. She'll end up working the saloons within a week." Jacob's eyes flashed dangerously. "That's enough out of you." He turned to Nora again, his voice softer. "There are respectable positions. Mrs. Hollister at the Mercantile needs help. The school teacher is looking for an assistant." Nora looked at this man, this stranger who was offering her choices when everyone else had stripped them away. In his eyes, she saw no deceit, only a straightforward honesty that was as refreshing as it was unexpected. "Why would you do this?" she asked. "Why offer me freedom when you've paid for a bride?" Jacob finished when she faltered. "Because a true marriage isn't bought and sold, Miss Mackenzie, it's freely given." He gestured toward the station door. "My wagon's outside. I can take you to the hotel in town, or to my ranch as a guest, until you decide what you want to do. Either way, you're free to choose." For the first time since her stepfather had announced his arrangement, Nora felt something other than despair, a small flicker of hope. She studied Jacob Wayland's face, looking for signs of trickery or hidden motives, but found none. "I have no money," she said. "No way to support myself." "We'll figure something out," Jacob replied. "This is a hard country, but not an impossible one. People help each other out here." The idea of making her own way, of not being under anyone's control, was both terrifying and exhilarating. And yet, the thought of being alone in a strange town with no resources. "Your ranch," she said finally. "You said I could stay there. As a guest." Jacob nodded. "There's a small cabin near the main house where my ranch hand used to live before he got married and moved to town. It's simple but clean. You'd have your privacy and time to think." Nora took a deep breath. "Then I'll accept your offer of temporary lodging, Mr. Wayland, until I decide what to do next." Relief visibly washed over Jacob's features. "Good, that's good." He offered a small smile. "And please call me Jacob." The driver looked between them, clearly disgruntled that his job had taken such an unexpected turn. "So you're not sending her back?" "That's not my decision to make," Jacob replied firmly. "It's hers." As they stepped out of the station into the bright Colorado sunshine, Nora felt the weight on her shoulders lighten slightly. She wasn't free of her problems, far from it, but for the first time in weeks, she had been given a choice. Jacob's wagon was simple but well-maintained, with a team of 2 strong horses waiting patiently at the hitching post. He helped Nora up to the seat with a respectful hand, then climbed up beside her. As they pulled away from the station, leaving behind the disgruntled driver, Nora stole a glance at the man beside her. Not her husband, not her owner, but perhaps, just perhaps, an ally in this strange new world. The road from Julesburg to Jacob Wayland's ranch wound through rolling grasslands dotted with stands of cottonwood and pine. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the landscape, turning the prairie grass to gold. Despite her exhaustion and uncertainty, Nora couldn't help but be moved by the wild beauty of this untamed country. "It's different from the East," Jacob commented, noting her interest in the surroundings. "Takes some getting used to." "It's beautiful," Nora admitted. "Wilder than I imagined." Jacob nodded. "That it is, both the land and the people." He glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "May I ask what they told you about coming out here as a bride, I mean?" Nora's hands tightened in her lap. "My stepfather informed me that he had arranged a marriage for me with a rancher in Colorado. When I refused, I was persuaded otherwise." She didn't elaborate on the persuasion, the locked room, the threats, the choice between this journey or being committed to an asylum for female hysteria. "I never meant for it to happen that way," Jacob said quietly. "I wrote to a marriage broker in St. Louis, said I was looking for a wife willing to come west, specified I wanted someone who'd choose to come of her own free will." His jaw tightened. Seems the broker had other ideas. "Why did you seek a bride this way?" Nora asked, curious despite herself. Jacob Wayland was not unattractive, tall and strong, with features that, while weathered by outdoor life, were handsome in a rugged way. Jacob was silent for a long moment. "There aren't many unmarried women out here," he finally said, "and well, I'm not much for social gatherings. My ranch keeps me busy." He glanced at her. "I get lonely sometimes. Thought it might be nice to have someone to share the place with." The simplicity and honesty of his answer caught Nora off guard. There was no pretense in his words, no crafted story to impress her. Just a man admitting to loneliness and the desire for companionship. "I'm sorry it didn't work out as you hoped," she found herself saying. Jacob shrugged. "Don't be, not your fault, and who knows? Maybe things happen for a reason." They fell into silence as the wagon continued its journey. After about an hour, Jacob pointed to a cluster of buildings nestled in a small valley ahead. "That's it," he said. "Wayland Ranch. Not much compared to some, but it's mine. Built it with my own hands." As they drew closer, Nora could make out a modest main house built of logs and weathered boards, a large barn, several corrals, and a few smaller outbuildings. A creek ran behind the property, with cottonwoods lining its banks. Cattle grazed in the distance and horses moved about in one of the corrals. "It's lovely," Nora said, and meant it. There was something appealing about the neat, well-maintained property. It spoke of hard work and care. Jacob's expression brightened at her approval. "Thank you. Been working on it for 7 years now." He guided the wagon toward the main house, adding, "Started with just 20 acres and 6 cows. Now I've got over 300 acres and a herd of 80. The wagon rolled to a stop in front of the house. Jacob jumped down and came around to help Nora descend. As her feet touched the ground, a large dog came bounding around the corner of the house, barking enthusiastically. "That's Rusty," Jacob said as the dog skidded to a halt before them, tail wagging furiously. "He's friendly, just noisy." Nora cautiously extended her hand, and the big dog sniffed it before pressing his head against her palm, demanding to be petted. She smiled despite herself, scratching behind his ears. "He likes you," Jacob observed. "He's a good judge of character." "I've always loved dogs," Nora said softly. "My mother had a spaniel when I was a child." Jacob watched her for a moment, then gestured toward one of the smaller buildings about 50 yards from the main house. "That's the cabin I mentioned. Let me show you." He led the way, carrying Nora's small carpetbag, the only luggage she had been allowed to bring. The cabin was indeed small but neat and clean, with a bed, a table with 2 chairs, a small cookstove, and a chest of drawers. A window looked out toward the creek and mountains beyond. "It's not fancy," Jacob said, setting down her bag, "but it's weather-tight and private. The pump outside has good water. There's a wash house behind the main house you can use." He pointed to a cord hanging by the door. "If you need anything, pull that. It rings a bell in the main house." Nora was touched by the thoughtfulness of the arrangement. "Thank you. This is more than I expected." Jacob nodded, looking slightly embarrassed by her gratitude. "I'll bring you some supper in about an hour if that's all right. You must be tired from your journey." "That would be very kind," Nora replied. After Jacob left, Nora sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. Just that morning, she had been a prisoner being transported to an unknown fate. Now she was a guest, free to make her own decisions. The kindness of this stranger, this man who had technically purchased her as a bride but refused to claim his property, was almost too much to comprehend. She moved to the window, looking out at the ranch spread before her. In the distance, Jacob was walking toward the barn, Rusty at his heels. She watched as he stopped to check something on the corral fence, his movements efficient and purposeful. What sort of man was Jacob Wayland? And what would become of her here in this wild country so far from everything she had known? The next morning dawned clear and bright. Nora woke to the sounds of the ranch coming to life, cattle lowing in the distance, chickens clucking, the whinny of horses. She had slept better than expected in the simple bed, exhaustion from her journey overcoming the strangeness of her surroundings. After washing her face in the basin and changing into her one spare dress, a simple blue cotton that had seen better days, she ventured outside. The morning air was crisp and clean, filled with the scent of pine and grass. She took a moment to simply breathe it in, savoring the feeling of being outdoors without restraint. "Good morning," called a voice, startling her. Jacob was approaching from the direction of the barn, a bucket in one hand. "I hope you slept well." "I did, thank you," Nora replied. She noticed he was already dressed for work, his sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned, muscular forearms. "Is there anything I can do to help? I don't want to be a burden." Jacob seemed surprised by the offer. "You're not a burden, Miss Mackenzie. You're a guest." "Even guests can make themselves useful," she countered. "And please call me Nora." A smile touched his lips. "Nora, then," he considered for a moment. "Well, if you're determined to help, I wouldn't say no to someone collecting eggs while I milk the cow. The chicken coop's just behind the main house." "I can do that," Nora said, glad to have a task. Back in Boston, before her father's death and her mother's unfortunate remarriage, she had been raised to be a proper lady. But her mother had also believed in practical skills, and Nora knew her way around basic household tasks. Jacob showed her to the coop and handed her a small basket. "Watch out for the rooster," he warned. "He thinks he's twice his size and half again as mean." Nora smiled at that, the first genuine smile since arriving. "I'll be careful." As Jacob went to tend to the cow, Nora entered the coop. The hens clucked indignantly at her intrusion but soon settled as she moved carefully among them, collecting the warm eggs from the nesting boxes. There was something soothing about the simple task, a connection to normality in the midst of her upturned life. By the time she finished, she had gathered over a dozen eggs. As she exited the coop, she spotted Jacob emerging from the barn with a pail of milk. "Successful hunt," he called. Nora held up the basket. "Very." They met at the back door of the main house. "Come in," Jacob invited. "We can have breakfast." Nora hesitated. "Are you sure? I'm happy to eat in the cabin, please," he said. "I don't often have company for meals. It would be nice." The interior of Jacob's house was simple but comfortable, a large main room with a stone fireplace, a wooden table with chairs, a few pieces of sturdy furniture. A doorway led to what Nora presumed was a bedroom, and a corner of the main room served as a kitchen with a large cookstove, a sink with a pump and cupboards. "It's not much," Jacob said, noticing her appraisal, "but it's home." "It's lovely," Nora replied honestly. The house was clean and well-ordered, with unexpected touches that spoke of care, a bookshelf filled with volumes, curtains at the windows, a colorful quilt thrown over the back of a chair. Jacob set about preparing breakfast, slicing ham, mixing eggs for scrambling, putting coffee on to boil. Nora stood awkwardly for a moment before asking, "May I help?" "You can set the table if you like," he said, indicating where the plates and utensils were kept. "And there's bread in that bin there." They worked together companionably, moving around each other in the small kitchen space. When breakfast was ready, they sat across from each other at the table. "I should tell you," Jacob said as they began to eat, "I'll be riding out to check fences today. I'll be gone most of the morning. You're welcome to explore the ranch. Use whatever you need in the house." "Thank you," Nora replied. "Actually, I was wondering if I might wash some clothes. I wasn't able to bring much with me." Jacob's expression darkened momentarily, a flash of anger that Nora somehow knew wasn't directed at her. "Of course. There's soap in the wash house and a line for drying." He hesitated. "If you need other things, clothes, personal items, I can take you into town tomorrow. There's a mercantile that carries just about everything." "That's very kind, but I have no money," Nora reminded him. Jacob waved this away. "Consider it an advance on wages." "Wages?" Nora looked at him in surprise. "If you'd like to stay on for a while, I could use the help around the ranch," Jacob explained. "Cooking, keeping house, tending the garden. I'd pay you fair wages, of course, separate from any other arrangement." He met her eyes directly. "No strings attached. You'd be an employee, free to leave whenever you choose." The offer took Nora by surprise. It was practical, respectful, and gave her a way to establish herself independently while she figured out her next steps. "I would appreciate that," she said. "Thank you." Jacob nodded, looking pleased. "Good. We can discuss the details when I get back." After breakfast, Jacob rode out on a handsome bay horse, and Nora set about washing her meager wardrobe. The physical task was welcome, giving her hands something to do while her mind processed all that had happened. As she hung the clean clothes to dry in the Colorado sunshine, she found herself considering her situation with more clarity than she had managed in weeks. She was thousands of miles from Boston, yes, but what waited for her there? A stepfather who had sold her like property, no mother to turn to, few friends who would risk helping her against Alfred Bartholomew's wishes, given his standing in the community. Here, she had nothing but also, in a strange way, everything. A chance to start fresh. A job offer that came with respect and independence. And a man who, despite having every legal right to claim her as a wife, had torn up the contract and given her a choice instead. Jacob returned around midday, dusty from his work but with a satisfied air about him. He found Nora in the small kitchen garden behind the house, weeding the rows of vegetables she had discovered there. "You didn't have to do that," he said, dismounting from his horse. Nora sat back on her heels, pushing a strand of hair from her face. "I wanted to." The garden was well planted but needed some attention. Jacob looked genuinely touched. "My mother started that garden years ago. I try to keep it up, but between the cattle and everything else." He shrugged. "Thank you." "You mentioned your mother," Nora said, rising and brushing dirt from her skirt. "Is your family nearby?" A shadow crossed Jacob's face. "No, they passed on. My father 5 years ago, my mother 3. It's just me now." "I'm sorry," Nora said softly. "My mother died last year." "My father when I was 16. Jacob nodded in understanding. "It's hard losing them." He cleared his throat. "I need to tend to Drifter here and check on a few things. Would you like to see more of the ranch afterward?" "I would," Nora replied, surprising herself with how much she meant it. The afternoon passed pleasantly as Jacob showed Nora around the Wayland ranch. He was clearly proud of what he had built, pointing out improvements he had made and plans for the future. Nora found herself genuinely interested, asking questions about the cattle operation, the crops he grew for feed, and the daily workings of ranch life. "How did you come to be a rancher?" she asked as they walked along the creek that formed the eastern boundary of his property. Jacob bent to pick up a flat stone, skipping it across the water's surface. "My father was a farmer back in Missouri. After the war, I fought for the Union. I didn't want to go back to farming. Wanted something different, something of my own." He skipped another stone. "Came out west with what savings I had, worked as a hired hand on a few ranches, learned the business. Then bought this land when no one else wanted it. Wasn't much at first, just scrubby grassland most folks thought was too dry for anything useful." "But you saw something in it," Nora observed. Jacob nodded. "I did. The creek runs year-round, even in drought. The grass might look sparse, but it's nutritious for cattle, and I was willing to work harder than most." He glanced at her. "What about you? What did you do back in Boston?" Nora sighed. "After my father died, my mother and I lived modestly on what he left us. I helped run the household, did charity work with the church. When Mother became ill, I cared for her." She hesitated. "After she died, my stepfather, well, he had different ideas about my place in the household." Jacob's expression darkened. "He mistreated you." It wasn't a question, but Nora answered anyway. "He saw me as a burden, an expense. When the marriage broker's advertisement came, he saw an opportunity to be rid of me and make a profit in one transaction." Jacob's hand tightened on a stone he had picked up, his knuckles whitening. "I'm sorry that happened to you." "It wasn't your fault," Nora said. "Maybe not directly," he replied. "But I put the request out there. I should have been more careful." He threw the stone hard, watching it splash into the water without attempting to skip it. "Men like your stepfather, they're no better than slave traders." The vehemence in his voice surprised her. "You couldn't have known." Jacob was silent for a moment. "My mother was Cherokee," he said finally. "My father met her when he was trading in Indian Territory. They fell in love, got married proper. But some folks never saw her as anything but property my father had acquired." His blue eyes, the feature that most masked his mixed heritage, met Nora's. "I know what it's like to be seen as less than human. I'd never willingly do that to another person." Nora was moved by his confession, by the pain and conviction in his voice. "I believe you," she said simply. They stood there by the creek for a long moment, the afternoon sun warming their shoulders, a new understanding flowing between them as surely as the water at their feet. That evening, after a simple supper they prepared together, Jacob walked Nora back to her cabin in the gathering twilight. Rusty accompanied them, ranging ahead and circling back as if checking the perimeter. "I meant what I said about the job," Jacob told her as they reached her door. "I could use the help, and it would give you time to decide what you want to do next." Nora nodded. "I accept your offer, Mr. Wayland." "Jacob, I'll work hard and earn my keep." "I know you will." He hesitated. "We can ride into town tomorrow if you like, get you whatever you need." "Thank you," Nora replied. "I'd appreciate that." Jacob touched the brim of his hat in a respectful gesture. "Good night, then. Sleep well." As Nora watched him walk back toward the main house, Rusty trotting at his side, she was struck by a strange feeling, not quite contentment, not with her future still so uncertain, but something close to hope. In the span of 2 days, she had gone from captive to employee, from despair to possibility. She thought of Jacob Wayland, his quiet strength, his unexpected kindness, the pain in his eyes when he spoke of his mother. He was a puzzle, this man who had inadvertently purchased her freedom rather than her servitude. Nora knew she should still be wary. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. And yet, as she prepared for bed in the small cabin that was now, however temporarily, her home, she found herself wondering if perhaps fate had not been entirely cruel in bringing her to this wild place and this unusual man. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that surprised Nora with its comfort. True to his word, Jacob took her into Julesburg the next day, where he introduced her to the shopkeepers as Miss Mackenzie, my new housekeeper. The title gave her a place, an identity separate from the mail-order bride she had been meant to be. At the mercantile, Jacob insisted she select fabric for new dresses, practical shoes, undergarments, and personal items. When she protested the expense, he was firm. "You need proper clothes for ranch work," he said. "Consider it a business expense." Mrs. Hollister, the merchant's wife, helped Nora choose what she needed, her kind eyes full of questions she was too polite to ask. "You come by any time you need company, dear," she said as they prepared to leave. "Not many young ladies out this way. It's good to have friends." Nora was touched by the woman's kindness. "Thank you. I will." They also visited the bank where Jacob established an account in Nora's name and deposited her first month's wages in advance. "So you'll have something of your own," he explained. "Independence matters." Back at the ranch, Nora threw herself into her new role with determination. She cleaned the main house until it shone, tended the garden until it flourished, cooked meals that Jacob declared were the best he'd eaten in years. In the evenings, she often sat on the porch of her cabin, watching the sunset paint the Colorado sky in spectacular colors, Rusty frequently abandoning his master to lie at her feet. Jacob, for his part, was a fair employer. He never asked more of her than was reasonable, always thanked her for her work, and respected her privacy. He taught her about ranch life, how to collect eggs without upsetting the hens, how to milk the cow properly, how to tell when the garden vegetables were ready for harvesting. Sometimes in the evenings, they would sit on the porch of the main house, talking as the stars came out. Jacob told her about his years building the ranch, the hard winters and the rewarding springs. Nora shared stories of her childhood in Boston, her mother's gentle wisdom, the books she loved to read. They never spoke directly of the circumstances that had brought her to Colorado, nor of the marriage contract that Jacob had torn to pieces. But sometimes Nora would catch him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher, thoughtful, perhaps, or wistful. One evening in late July, about a month after Nora's arrival, Jacob returned from town with a package. "For you," he said, handing it to her with an almost shy smile. "Saw it at the mercantile and thought you might like it." Inside the brown paper wrapping, Nora found a book, a collection of poetry by Emily Dickinson. She looked up at Jacob in surprise. "You mentioned you liked poetry," he said, "and that your mother used to read Dickinson to you when you were ill." Nora was touched that he had remembered such a small detail from one of their conversations. "Thank you," she said, running her fingers over the embossed cover. "This is very thoughtful." Jacob shrugged, looking embarrassed by her gratitude. "It's nothing. Just thought you might be missing books out here." That night, Nora sat on her bed reading the poems by lamplight, struck by how this simple gift represented something significant. Jacob Wayland had listened to her, had paid attention to what mattered to her. It was a kind of respect she had rarely experienced from a man. As July turned to August, the rhythm of ranch life continued. Nora found herself looking forward to Jacob's return each day, enjoying their conversations over meals, taking pride in keeping his home comfortable. She began to learn the names of the cattle, to recognize the distinct personalities of the horses in the corral, to feel a connection to this piece of Colorado earth. One afternoon, Jacob taught her to ride. She had ridden before, in Boston parks on placid mares with side saddles, but Western riding was different. Jacob selected a gentle mare named Daisy for her, and patiently showed her how to saddle the horse, how to mount, how to guide the animal with subtle pressure from her knees rather than just the reins. "You're a natural," he said, as Nora guided Daisy around the corral with increasing confidence. "Most Eastern ladies take weeks to get comfortable in a Western saddle." "I think Daisy deserves most of the credit," Nora laughed. "She's very patient with me." "She knows quality when she sees it," Jacob replied, his eyes warm as they met hers. That warmth stayed with Nora long after the riding lesson ended. It kindled something in her that both excited and frightened her, a feeling she wasn't ready to name. As summer began to wane, Jacob became preoccupied with preparations for winter. He worked longer hours, often returning after dark, tired but satisfied with the day's progress. "We need to get the hay cut and stored," he explained one evening as they sat at the supper table. "And I've got to make sure all the buildings are weather-tight before the snow comes." He looked at her across the table. "Winters are harsh here, nothing like what you're used to in Boston." "I'll help however I can," Nora offered. "I'm stronger than I look." Jacob's eyes crinkled with his smile. "I've noticed." He hesitated. "Nora, there's something I've been meaning to ask you." Her heart skipped a beat. "Yes. The harvest dance is coming up in town. It's a tradition. Everyone from the surrounding ranches and farms comes in for music and dancing, a last celebration before winter sets in." He cleared his throat. "I was wondering if you might want to attend. With me." Nora blinked in surprise. "Like a social outing?" Jacob nodded, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Yes, not as employer and employee, just as friends, if you'd like friends." The word hung between them, seemingly inadequate for what they had become to each other, and yet more than either had explicitly acknowledged. "I'd like that very much," Nora said softly. Jacob's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Good, that's good." The night of the harvest dance arrived with perfect late summer weather, warm enough for comfort, but with a hint of autumn crispness in the air. Nora wore her best dress, a blue calico she had made from the fabric Jacob had bought her, with her hair arranged in a simple but flattering style. When she emerged from her cabin, she found Jacob waiting, dressed in clean trousers, a white shirt, and a vest she had never seen before. He had trimmed his beard and slicked back his hair. He looked, Nora thought, quite handsome. "You look beautiful," Jacob said, his voice slightly hoarse. "Thank you," Nora replied, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. "You look very nice as well." They drove to town in Jacob's wagon, the night air cool against their skin, the stars brilliant overhead. As they approached Julesburg, Nora could hear music and laughter spilling from the community hall. Inside, the hall was transformed with harvest decorations, sheaves of wheat, pumpkins, colorful autumn leaves. Lanterns cast a warm glow over the proceedings. A small band played lively tunes while couples danced and others chatted in groups around the edges of the room. "Jacob Wayland," called a booming voice as they entered. A large man with a sheriff's badge approached them, clapping Jacob on the shoulder. "Didn't think we'd see you here this year." "Wouldn't miss it, Sheriff Davis," Jacob replied. "Allow me to introduce Miss Nora Mackenzie. She's been working at the ranch these past months." Sheriff Davis tipped his hat to Nora. "Pleasure, Miss Mackenzie. Welcome to Julesburg." Throughout the evening, Jacob introduced Nora to what seemed like the entire population of the area: ranchers, farmers, shopkeepers, and their families. Everyone was welcoming, though Nora noticed curious glances and whispered conversations when they thought she wasn't looking. "They're wondering about us," she murmured to Jacob as they took a break from dancing. Jacob handed her a cup of punch. "People always wonder. It's human nature." "What have you told them? About me, I mean." "The truth," Jacob replied simply. "That you came west as a housekeeper and have been a blessing to my ranch." He met her eyes. "The rest is nobody's business but ours." Nora felt a rush of gratitude for his discretion and respect. "Thank you." "May I have this dance?" Jacob asked as the band began a waltz. Nora placed her hand in his outstretched one. "You may." As they moved across the floor, Nora was conscious of Jacob's hand at her waist, the slight calluses on his palm where it held hers, the clean scent of soap and leather that seemed to define him. They fit together well, moving in harmony as if they had danced together many times before. "You dance beautifully," Jacob said, his blue eyes never leaving her face. "So do you," Nora replied, surprised. "I wouldn't have expected a rancher to be so accomplished." Jacob smiled. "My mother insisted I learn, said a man should know how to move with grace as well as strength." "She was a wise woman." "She would have liked you," Jacob said softly, "very much." The simple statement moved Nora deeply. In it, she heard all the things Jacob wasn't saying, that she had become important to him, that he saw her as more than an employee, that perhaps he was beginning to imagine a future with her in it. As the evening progressed, Nora found herself relaxing and truly enjoying herself for the first time in years. She danced with Jacob, chatted with the town ladies, laughed at the antics of the children racing between the adults' legs. When they finally headed home under a canopy of stars, she felt a contentment she had thought lost to her forever. "Thank you for tonight," she said as the wagon rolled along the quiet road. "I can't remember when I've enjoyed myself so much." Jacob glanced at her, his face half illuminated by moonlight. "I'm glad. You deserve happiness, Nora." The simple sincerity of his words touched her heart. They rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts but somehow together in them. When they reached the ranch, Jacob helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. Standing there in the moonlight, Nora felt a shift between them, subtle but undeniable. There was a question in Jacob's eyes as they met hers, a possibility neither had voiced, but he simply said, "Good night, Nora. Sleep well." "Good night, Jacob," she replied, turning toward her cabin with mixed emotions churning in her heart. As she prepared for bed, Nora found herself at a crossroads. In the 3 months since arriving at Wayland Ranch, she had healed in ways she hadn't thought possible. She had regained her confidence, built a new life, found purpose in her work. She had enough money saved now that she could leave if she wished, travel to Denver perhaps, or even further west. But the thought of leaving brought no joy, only a hollow ache. Somewhere along the way, this place had become home. And Jacob, kind, honorable Jacob with his quiet strength and unexpected gentleness, had become far more than an employer. Sleep eluded her that night as Nora confronted the truth she had been avoiding for weeks. She was falling in love with Jacob Wayland. The autumn days grew shorter, the nights colder. The aspens in the hills turned golden, their leaves trembling in the increasing winds. Jacob worked from dawn to dusk preparing the ranch for winter, and Nora matched his efforts preserving garden produce, mending clothes, banking the foundations of both houses with straw for insulation. They continued their evening talks, but something had changed since the harvest dance. There was a new awareness between them, a tension that was not unpleasant but uncertain. Sometimes their hands would brush as they passed items at the table, and they would both pause, eyes meeting briefly before looking away. One crisp October morning, Jacob announced he needed to ride to a neighboring ranch to help with a cattle drive. "I'll be gone 3 days, maybe 4, he told Nora over breakfast. "Will you be all right here alone?" "Of course," Nora assured him. "Rusty and I will keep everything in order." Jacob nodded, but he looked troubled. "If there's any problem, Sheriff Davis knows to check on you, and Mrs. Hollister said she'd ride out if the weather turns." "I'll be fine," Nora repeated, touched by his concern. "This isn't my first autumn on the ranch." "No," Jacob agreed with a small smile. "Hard to believe you've been here almost 4 months," he hesitated. "They've been good months, Nora, the best the ranch has seen in years." The compliment warmed her. "For me as well." After Jacob rode out, Nora felt his absence keenly. The ranch seemed too quiet, too empty without his presence. She kept busy with chores, talking to Rusty as she worked, but the days stretched long. On the 3rd day, the weather changed abruptly. Dark clouds rolled in from the west, and the temperature dropped rapidly. By mid-afternoon, the first snowflakes were falling, large, wet flakes that quickly began to accumulate. Nora wasn't particularly worried the house was well stocked with firewood and provisions, but she did wonder about Jacob, out on the range in the deteriorating conditions. By evening, the snow was falling heavily, driven by strong winds that howled around the eaves of the cabin. Nora stoked her fire and settled in with a book, Rusty curled at her feet. The dog had refused to stay at the main house, following Nora to her cabin instead, as if appointed her guardian in Jacob's absence. Just as she was preparing for bed, Rusty suddenly leapt up, barking and running to the door. A moment later, Nora heard the sound of hoofbeats, muffled by the snow. She grabbed her shawl and opened the door to see Jacob dismounting from Drifter, both of them covered in snow. "Jacob," she exclaimed, "I wasn't expecting you in this weather." "Saw the storm coming," he replied, his voice rough with cold. "Didn't want to be caught out in it." He led Drifter toward the barn. "I'll just see to him and be right in." Nora hurried to the main house to stoke the fire and put on coffee. When Jacob came in 15 minutes later, she had a hot meal waiting for him, reheated stew and freshly baked bread. "You're a sight for sore eyes," he said, stamping snow from his boots at the door. His face was red from cold, his hair damp with melted snow. "Wasn't sure I'd make it back before the worst hit." "You shouldn't have risked it," Nora scolded, helping him out of his snow-covered coat. "The cattle drive could have waited." Jacob's eyes met hers. "It wasn't the cattle I was worried about." The simple admission hung in the air between them. Nora felt her heart quicken. "Oh, I couldn't stop thinking about you here alone," Jacob continued, his voice low. "With the storm coming. I know you're capable, but—" He shook his head. "I needed to get home. Home." The word resonated with meaning. This wasn't just his ranch, his property, it was home. And somehow she had become part of what that word meant to him. "I'm glad you're safe," Nora said softly. They stood there in the warm kitchen, the storm raging outside, something unspoken but powerful building between them. Jacob took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "Nora," he began, his voice rough with emotion. A particularly strong gust of wind rattled the windows, breaking the moment. Jacob stepped back, running a hand through his damp hair. "I should eat before this gets cold. You've gone to too much trouble for me to let it waste." The storm raged through the night and into the next day, dropping over a foot of snow before moving eastward. Nora and Jacob were effectively snowbound at the ranch, but with plenty of supplies and each other's company, neither minded. They spent the days working together to care for the animals and maintain the property, the evenings reading or talking by the fire. Jacob told her stories of his early days on the ranch, and Nora shared more about her childhood in Boston. They discovered a shared love of literature, a similar sense of humor, and a mutual appreciation for simple pleasures. On the 3rd day of their snowbound state, Nora was in the kitchen kneading bread when Jacob came in from checking the livestock. She looked up to greet him and was struck by the expression on his face, a mixture of determination and vulnerability that made her heart skip. "Jacob, is everything all right?" He removed his hat, turning it in his hands. "Everything's fine." The animals are all healthy, the buildings weathered the storm well. He took a deep breath. Nora, there's something I need to say. She wiped her flour-covered hands on her apron, giving him her full attention. Yes. When I first wrote to that marriage broker, I thought what I wanted was simple: a wife to share the work, to end the loneliness of ranch life. He met her eyes directly. I never expected you, never expected to feel this way. Nora's breath caught in her throat. What way? Jacob set his hat aside and crossed the kitchen to stand before her. Like my heart would break if you decided to leave. Like the ranch isn't home unless you're in it. He reached out tentatively, taking her flour-dusted hand in his. Nora Mackenzie, I've fallen in love with you. The simple, honest declaration brought tears to Nora's eyes. Jacob, I know it hasn't been that long, he rushed on. And I know how you came here, the circumstances. I don't expect anything. I just needed you to know you still have every choice before you. If you want to leave, I'll understand. If you want to stay as things are, that's fine too. But if there's any chance you might someday feel for me what I feel for you. Nora placed her free hand against his cheek, feeling the roughness of his beard against her palm. Jacob Wayland, I think I started falling in love with you the day you tore up that contract and gave me a choice. Relief and joy washed over Jacob's features. Truly, truly, Nora confirmed, her heart full to bursting. I love you, Jacob. Not because you rescued me, but because of who you are: kind, honorable, gentle. Because you see me as a person, not a possession. Jacob's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He pulled her closer, one hand at the small of her back, the other still holding hers. May I kiss you, Nora Mackenzie? Please do, she whispered. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question and an answer both. When they parted, Jacob rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if savoring the moment. I never thought I'd find this, he said softly. Someone who fits so perfectly into my life, my heart. Nor I, Nora replied. Especially not after being sold like property. Jacob pulled back slightly to look into her eyes. Nora, I want to ask you something, but I need you to know you can say no. Your choice matters to me more than anything. Ask, she encouraged, already knowing what the question would be. Will you marry me? Not because of any contract or obligation, but because we choose each other freely and completely. Nora's answer was immediate and certain. Yes, Jacob, I choose you. He kissed her again, more deeply this time, his arms tightening around her as if he never wanted to let go. When they finally parted, both were smiling, their futures spreading before them as vast and promising as the Colorado sky. They were married 2 weeks later in the Julesburg church, a simple ceremony attended by the townsfolk who had come to know and respect them both. Nora wore a dress of ivory satin ordered specially from Denver, and Jacob wore a new suit that made him look both distinguished and slightly uncomfortable. Sheriff Davis stood as Jacob's best man, and Mrs. Hollister helped Nora prepare for the ceremony, filling the role of mother that both bride and groom lacked. Never seen a man look at a woman the way Jacob looks at you, Mrs. Hollister told Nora as she arranged the small bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers and greenery. That's real love, child. The kind that lasts. Nora believed it with all her heart. As she walked down the short aisle to where Jacob waited, his blue eyes shining with emotion, she felt as though her life had come full circle. From despair to joy, from captivity to choice, from loneliness to love. I, Jacob, take you, Nora, to be my wife, he vowed, his voice steady and sure. To love and to cherish, to honor and respect for all the days of our life together. When Nora repeated similar vows, her voice caught with emotion, but her heart was certain. This was right. This was where she belonged. The small reception at the hotel dining room afterward was a joyful affair. The townspeople had contributed food and drink. The band from the harvest dance provided music, and even Rusty made an appearance, sporting a ribbon around his neck for the occasion. "To the Waylands," Sheriff Davis toasted, raising his glass. "May your union be blessed with happiness, prosperity, and many little cowboys and cowgirls." Amid laughter and cheers, Jacob and Nora shared a private smile. Whatever the future held, they would face it together. That night, as they returned to the ranch, their ranch now snowflakes began to fall again, gentle and unhurried. "First snow of our marriage," Jacob said as he carried Nora across the threshold of the main house, now their shared home. "They say that's good luck. Do we need luck?" Nora asked, her arms around his neck. Jacob set her gently on her feet, looking down at her with such tenderness that it made her heart ache. "No," he said softly. "We have something much better than luck. We have love that's freely given, freely chosen." As winter settled over Wayland Ranch, Nora and Jacob settled into married life with a naturalness that felt like coming home after a long journey. The work was hard, the days often challenging, but they faced everything together, from blizzards that isolated them for days to the daily tasks of ranch life. They moved Nora's few possessions from the cabin to the main house, and Jacob surprised her by adding a small library to their home, a room with bookshelves he had built himself, stocked with volumes ordered from Denver. "So you'll always have new worlds to explore," he told her, "even when the snow keeps us homebound." Their evenings were spent by the fire, talking, reading, planning their future. They dreamed of expanding the ranch, of children playing in the yard, of growing old together on this land they both loved. Spring came to Colorado with a rush of new life, calves born, seeds planted, wildflowers blooming across the prairie. With it came news that thrilled them both. Nora was expecting their first child. "A baby," Jacob whispered, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "Our child." Nora covered his hand with hers. "A child who will grow up knowing they were wanted, cherished, who will never doubt they are loved." Jacob's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I will love this child as fiercely as I love their mother," he vowed. "And I will make sure they know, every day, that they are free to choose their own path in life." The promise was everything Nora could have wished for. Their son was born in early November, a healthy, robust boy with his father's blue eyes and a dusting of dark hair. They named him Thomas, after Nora's father, with the middle name Cedar, honoring Jacob's Cherokee heritage. "He's perfect," Jacob said, cradling his son with careful hands that were more accustomed to roping cattle than holding infants. "Perfect and free." As little Thomas grew, so did the Wayland Ranch. Jacob's careful management and hard work paid off in increased herds and expanded acreage. Nora's garden flourished, providing food for their table and extra to sell in town. They hired 2 ranch hands to help with the increased workload, built a larger barn, and added 2 rooms to the house. Their family grew as well. 2 years after Thomas, they welcomed a daughter, Elizabeth, named for Jacob's mother. With her came a fullness to their lives neither had dared dream of in the days before they found each other. 5 years after Nora had arrived in Julesburg as a reluctant mail-order bride, she stood on the porch of their home, watching Jacob teaching 4-year-old Thomas to ride a gentle pony. Elizabeth, not quite 2, sat on her hip, babbling happily and pointing at her brother and father. The ranch spread before her, green and thriving in the late spring sunshine. From forced journey to chosen home, from captivity to freedom, from loneliness to family, her life had transformed in ways she could never have imagined. Jacob looked up, catching her eye across the yard. His smile still made her heart skip, even after years of marriage. He said something to Thomas, then walked toward the house, his long strides eating up the distance between them. "What are my 3 favorite people doing?" he asked as he reached the porch, leaning in to kiss Nora softly. "Watching the man we love," Nora replied, leaning into his embrace as he wrapped an arm around her and Elizabeth. Jacob rested his cheek against her hair. "Are you happy, Nora? Truly happy?" "More than I ever thought possible," she answered honestly. "No regrets." "About staying here, choosing this life, choosing me?" Nora looked up at him, this man who had given her the most precious gift, the right to choose her own destiny. "Not one," she said. "Every day I choose you, and I always will." As the Colorado sun warmed their shoulders and their children's laughter filled the air, Nora Mackenzie Wayland knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, not because fate or contract had placed her there, but because she had chosen, freely and with her whole heart. And in that choice, she had found not just freedom but home,